too long, because after all, the whole exhibition and the catalogue and the title and everything is the statement of the curator, so you don't want me to be talking again, but you want to hear what the artists actually have to say about their work on top of what I have to say about their work. So the artists are Stuart and Shaun, who is over there. Then we have Sylvia, who did the ceramic works on that side. Carole will be with us in a minute, Carole Driver. She did that wonderful installation at the far end over there. And there is Carole, big entry. And we have Shaun Tarn's work over here. Shaun won't be here today. The concept of Birdbrain started quite literal, with images and objects that sparked discussions with fellow immigrants, artists, global nomads, and other imaginative, challenged people that we find every day around. The words followed the images and carved out the concept around the sense of misplacement that ultimately led to the choice of artists represented in this exhibition. I guess it's generally assumed that artists think outside the box. Well, not always, but these ones especially do. The trick is not to know where you're going, then you can't get lost, only sidetracked. And I always thought that is the best explanation of what we do at times. If we don't have any sense of direction, we make the most wonderful discoveries, and that is what this Birdbrain is about. Just the possibility to jump from one subject to the other until you find something that really brings it to the point and continue developing this. And it just comes to such a multi-layered work, such complexity, that really is showing in all of these artists' work. I let that sink in. A lack of roots doesn't mean a lack of context necessarily. While I'm in other projects like to question the white cube that tries to de-contextualize artwork, I think in this exhibition I'm really pleased to see these works that are so full of context in themselves on a white wall, which is not necessarily might refer to modus operandi, but it's just amazing. And this is one of the galleries that really has the possibility, that really has the big white walls that can display work that is so rich in context that it needs no distraction around it, and that gives you the opportunity to just look at every single row or at the whole installation and have no other disturbances around it. These works are all intelligent, curious, and disrespectful, and I think that's what brings them together. And I'm absolutely thrilled that all of you worked so wonderfully with me. So I pass on to Stuart Brightside with his works.
I've got 3 stories that I'm going to tell, and hopefully they'll sort of give you a bit of understanding about my Birdbrain. I was born in 1960 and grew up with 50s, 60s and 70s design, which my mother had a bit of an eye for. Colours, patterns, textures and a great sense of style. In the 90s, while at art school, my love for these designs culminated in my collecting of pottery, clothing, dinnerware, wallpapers and fabrics. Not huge amounts, but things I really loved, mostly from the 70s. On the other side of my childhood was my father, who was a bit of an inventor. He collected bits and pieces in a vast workshop which I spent most of my youth working in. I worked on old cars and motorbikes and learned how to build, weld and construct all types of things. Story number 2. 7.125 billion people, and consumer products built to last a few years at best. 150 billion farm animals killed each year for food. 80,000 acres of tropical rainforest destroyed daily. Period Hills landfill in Los Angeles, California covers 700 acres and towers 500 feet high, takes 12,000 tons of garbage a day, currently holds 3.7 million tons. Climate change, consumerism and capitalism. Story number 3. 12 o'clock, along the reaches of the street, held in a lunar synthesis, whispering lunar incarnations, dissolve the flaws of memory and all its clear relations, its divisions and precisions. Every street lamp that I pass beats like a fatalistic drum, and through the spaces of the dark, midnight shakes the memory as a madman shakes a dead geranium. That's just the first verse of the poem called Rhapsody on a Windy Night by T.S. Eliot. That's me.
Birdbrain. Many of my earliest memories has to do with flying. I have quite a few from the age around 3, and I was standing on a table planning my flight. I was going to throw myself out like this and then crunch up and land on the floor. It didn't really work out like so. My poor mom has also confirmed that I was preoccupied by trying to learn the art of the birds. Other ambitious projects involved umbrellas and balloons and bouncing on furniture to take off. And this scar here is a reminder of one of those attempts which nearly cost me my eyesight. And after a few concussions and hospital trips, I wisely decided to lie low for a while. The dreams didn't stop though, and I still have them, not as often anymore. But up to my mid-20s, I used to dream that I could fly. And the dreams were so real. I know how it feels to fly. Migration, another occupation of the birds. That's a preoccupation of mine as well. And I got on an airplane the first time at 17. And by now I don't even know how many, I can't remember how many flights I've been on. I love to be on the go. And there's nothing like new adventures and possibilities ahead. Migration doesn't always have to be physical though. The mind can be just as powerful in going places. And for me it's actually the most powerful tool when exploring new territories. I spend a lot of time roaming around my head full of ideas and playing around with my ideas, reconstructing and pulling them apart. And I actually think that this is the biggest asset and the sharpest tool in the toolbox when it comes to my arts practice. I work with mixed media, and all my work is about communicating an idea or a concept. And these past 2 years I mainly use ceramics, but more often than not I choose to introduce other elements as well, depending on what I want to say. In my world, the work of the artist and the work of the maker walks hand in hand. I think it's very important, it's important to me to construct or depict ideas with quality craftsmanship. And I have found my big love in the ceramics. It's actually a combination of most of my passions: painting, sculpting, physics, chemistry, and poetry. It's so fascinating, and I will spend the rest of my life exploring it, but only rubbing the surface of all the possibilities. It's very complex to get all the processes involved to work together. It's a lot of loss and of unpredictability until you have a finished piece in your hand. And I have not yet opened the kiln and found the exact vision that I had when I turned it on. Sometimes it's a catastrophe, and sometimes it's better than planned. And I think it's this unpredictability that's got the hold of me. And I see ceramic is poetry to me, working with soft clay, transforming an idea, capturing an idea and transforming it into stone. And it's a play with Mother Earth and fire, and it's not only my voice coming out in the work, it's stronger forces having a say. And these pieces here are all about an inside and an outside and transformation. So this piece I call inside and outside, and it's a play with or exploration of the concept inside and outside the box. Most of us people like to sharpen knives and clean and tidy facade, while staying safe and we might even be hiding inside an orderly box. And it's hard for someone else to see what's behind the surface, the true colors. So I place my neatly thrown cylinders up outside the box, and I puncture them to let the inside seep outside. And the content, the passion and potential rises like fire through a chip. And this other one in similar style, I call that one Same Inside. And it's a play with the idea that we're all the same beneath different shapes and surfaces. We all bleed red. And I'm fascinated with people and stories. And when you listen to people's stories, it's very soon obvious that most of us share the same soft inside, no matter shape or color or where on the planet we are. And these pieces here had a start, I call them transformation. And they had a starting point in Dunedin during hours of experimental drawing. It was part of my studies, and we were asked to come up with an idea to explore. And my initial immediate response was essence. And I had vision of 3 forms, like a little group or family. But during the exercises, they all transformed into one character. And by the end of my week in Dunedin, this was the end result, transformed into stone. And it's also the starting point for these other 3. So, and this project was also a transformation of my work process. I work with Susan and Florence over here, and she really challenged me in my work methods. I often work very, nice and tidy, clean lines and so on. But here, so this was the first one after this one, that one, number 2 and number 3. And in this one, I really challenged myself and the materiality of the clay. I stabbed it and ripped it and smacked it into shape, and they're very different from my previous work. And I look forward to take this project further. I do have lots of ideas for a bigger project, a bigger body of work. And I forgot to say about this one as well, that the box is made of swamp cowrie. It was a great find in a second-hand shop. And it's sort of a depiction as well. It was a feeling of sacrilege when I painted it white, but then it all makes sense that behind the nice, clean surface, there's a valuable treasure. It's hidden, but it's still there. It's still present. And to continue talking about this one, I forgot that as well. Why I chose, so this is mixed media, and I chose to work with clay, wool and wood because they are fundamental raw materials for us humans, and we've always used them to build shelter and protection, and as well as materials for containment in clothing, surfaces to hide inside. So dislocation is a place I access through my mind. It's a colourful place where birdbrains fly around. Dislocation is the place where imagination and inspiration will be found. It's the home of the magician, and it is my playground.
I'm not quite sure where to start with this one, but I thought last night I really wanted to talk about what dislocation means to me and what the birdbrain is, because it wasn't quite what I thought it was. And last night I stayed awake thinking about it. And actually I'm going to have to get my glasses because I can't see my notes.
To get for you?
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind. So, this work here is part of a larger body of work, and which is part of another whole group of different kinds of work. Now, where that came from originally was when I was stopped in what I was doing. My background is, I've been a professional artist all my life, one way or another. I was working as a sculptor, doing heavy stuff and teaching sculpture, and the work is heavy, and I got sick. Work was too heavy for me, and bits fell off, as they do, like when you're doing that kind of stuff. And then also I had a major my brother and my father died within 6 weeks of each other, and that was my whole birth family gone. And I've been working with my brother a lot. He was a musician, and he worked with me on my installation with sound stuff. So it was a huge hit, and also with the physical stuff at the same time. So there was a huge amount of loss and grief and dislocation, discombobulation, not knowing where you are, what you're doing, complete, like you go into a complete birdbrain of not thinking straight at all of what the traditional meaning of birdbrain is, which is kind of stupid. Well, you can go into those spaces and they can last, and they can be quite, at the time, they're very, very uncomfortable. So this lasted quite a while for me, but because I'm a maker, and I kind of burn to make all the time, I can't stop, and I draw all the time, and I make all the time. I was working during that time, but because I was forced to work in a different way, I had to find different materials to what I'm normally used to. I was used to working big installations out in the bush for councils, things like this. And I was teaching sculpture, and I was teaching, all the major methods of sculpture. And I just couldn't do it. I couldn't see it for a start. I couldn't see it properly. It was dangerous. And I couldn't walk. And so I couldn't lift anything. And, when you're teaching sculpture and you can't lift anything, it's a real problem. So I had to find ways of working, and during my time of not being able to walk properly, I've always been very connected to the land that I live in, whichever land that might be. It takes a while, but there's a real deep connection which emerges. And so it's kind of like you're in love with the land. And that kind of, when I was unable to do very much, that developed strongly because I'd get on my poles, my walking poles, Nordic walking poles, and you can just get along. And so I was able to become really aware, much more aware than I normally am, of very small things in the environment, tiny things in the environment. If you're not going very fast, you see things really well. So I started noticing, I was in Australia at that point in time, and I was living in I was lucky because I was living in a quite green environment in Sydney, right near the most wonderful reserve called Harold Reed Reserve, and which is it's a completely hidden place, hardly anyone knows about it, in Middle Cove, which is it's an unusual place for Sydney. It's not flashy. It's a sort of Steiner enclave. So it's all recorders and violins and nobody mows the lawn. And so this is really good for finding small things. And so I was walking very slowly and I started noticing very, very carefully that the forms of the native plants, and not just seed bodies or buds or anything like that, but the whole process of metamorphosis of form within these very small structures. Now, Australian native plants are very tiny. Yeah, they're so small. People say, oh, the Australian bush is really boring. It's not boring. It's just very delicate, and it's based on water. And if there's no water, there's nothing growing. And then there's water, and then these little things come up. And those little things are wonderful. They're based on mathematics. They're all based on 4, 5s and 6s. And you can look at, you just go for a little walk and you pick a few things. I would pick them and put them in my pocket wrapped up in a tissue, come back and draw them. And I noticed this tremendous simple mathematics throughout the metamorphosis of the life of the structure and of the variety of similar plant form, but all based on 4, 5s and 6s. And I just started drawing all this stuff, and okay, sorry I got a bit lost here. Now, so what started happening was I began to get very fascinated by this form. I mean, I'm always interested in form, but this form was kind of very special somehow. The more I drew it, the more I started making the small sculptures from it, and I made tiny, I've made, well, they're called phytomorphs. These are part of that whole big project of phytomorphs, which is, phytomorphs means it's a representation of a plant. And so I just call the whole thing phytomorphs because that's what they are. But they also morph, they change. So what I began to become really aware of with all this drawing, and there's sketchbooks upon sketchbooks upon sketchbooks, and I draw not like a botanic drawing because I don't draw like that, but they were drawn from different angles, so that each tiny thing, and some of them, they're not microscopic, but they're small. Each tiny form was drawn from several angles. So, could see the form itself, experience the form itself. What more I worked on these, and it becomes a meditation, it becomes a very strong meditation. You're out there walking, you find the form, you're doing a repetition, keep your mind quiet when you're walking, and then you find little forms, they're like gifts that come to you. Take them back home, you draw them. The more I drew them, and the more I started to work on trying to work out how to make the larger drawings, the more I realised that what was happening here for me was a very profound thing, and that it was a very deep meditation of an understanding of that there's the void, there is nothing, then there is a dot, and then there is a sphere, and then there is a multitude of form. And that was the big revelation for me, and a real deep understanding of how form manifests. There is nothing, there is a dot, there is a sphere, and then there is a huge manifestation of an infinite variety of form. These pieces here are just some examples of the drawings. There's also the 3D as well. So that's the story of this work. Let's see. Okay, so what seems to happen with them is these ones become like logos. They become graphically very strong. Each one, you're not quite sure what it means. It seems to mean something. It's familiar, but you don't know quite what it is. There's a bit of a mystery there. That I find that interesting. So I never quite know what's going to come out. Making these is also a meditation. I can't make these pieces unless I'm completely quiet mind, because the balance between the negative and positive space is key, and they're done with a finger, and so you have to be totally on the ball the whole time that you're doing it. If you think at all, if there's a cloud passes, you can't make these. So that's what they are. And then they become sort of like whatever for the viewer, whatever your mind puts in, that's what they are. So that's nothing to do with me. With the presentation of these, Sylvia took these, she presented them her own way, they become something else again. And, for me, that's really interesting. It's a surprise for me. And that's also part of the Birdbrain thing, which, you can probably talk about that more. So that's the story of this one.
Thank you, Carole. It was actually a really interesting process with this one, because it was also the question for me, where does it is an installation work, it is not single artwork, so where do we draw the line between the installation that the artist has in mind and the interpretation that the curator puts into it? And I looked at them as symbols and as a kind of visual art. We talked a lot about that. But then I didn't look at all, or I stepped completely away from the vision that you had, I think, by displaying them. So I stayed with the groups, but I had, from the beginning when I saw them spreading out, I had this vision of a really dislocated periodical system that gives you an overall impression, so you jump from one symbol to the other and create sentences with a single symbol. So this is, actually you are completely right, this is a beautiful example of how the Birdbrains bounce off each other. So it was great, and especially thanks to Stuart, who actually then did the actual hanging of the work, which was a long and really quiet process.
Yeah, thank you.
And an amazing job. Thank you so much, Stuart. Mostly illustrator, storyteller. He has won an Academy Award for his short film The Lost Thing, that is based on one of his stories. And what for me is quite big, he has won the Astrid Lindgren Memorial Award in 2011 for his wordless novel, The Arrival. The Astrid Lindgren Memorial Award is given to contributors for international children's literature, but The Arrival is not really children's literature, or he himself doesn't consider himself a children's illustrator, mostly because if you look at his work, mostly books, they attract any age group. They're not necessarily for children, but they're so rich in visuals and layers that I don't think any age can go around being fascinated by them. So we were lucky enough to have some of his original works and a lot of his prints. Actually, I'm quite pleased. The prints are of such excellent quality that you sometimes hardly see the difference. This one is a print and that one is the original, not the original work, but this one is an original work, acrylic and oil on paper. So they're just wonderful and beautifully replicated. I went through a keynote that Shaun did write for the IBBY conference. Now IBBY is International Board of Books for Young People. I didn't know that before. And if you want to, please give me your email address and I send you the link, because it really sums up what his work is all about. And it's exactly after I read that I thought, oh, that's why I chose him. He was one of my Birdbrains that I came instantly when I started working on the concept. I thought, oh, it would be great to have his work in the exhibition, because it's all about dislocation. It's all about the strangeness, the curiosity, the embracing of being somewhere where no one actually knows what you're doing there. It's kind of the migrant, the nomad, the strangeness of the everyday living that just comes clear to you when you go different places, when you try to look at things another way. Because what we are doing is pretty strange to begin with, and when you look at Shaun's work, you actually see how weird it must look for an outsider to use a knife, for example, to butter your toast in the morning. Who comes up with that? Just try to look at it like that, and you will see that our whole world is pretty strange for everyone who's not accustomed to all the things we do day by day. And you notice how strange it is when you go into a different cultural context. And people do things different, and that's what it is for migrants, refugees to come to our country. And I say our country, my accent is as thick as anything, so, but instead, this is my home. I've chosen it for now, so I'm talking about my country, where I am. And the beauty about our country is that we all come from such different cultural backgrounds, no matter if it was our generation or 3 generations back, 5 generations back. We all arrived at this island, on these islands at some stage. So I can give you the link. He has a website, he has a lot of background on his own approach to read his work. I can give you a personal account on his work, how I came across him. And I'm going back to my notes here. Like for many immigrants, the arrival provided comfort when we hit the wall, moving to rural New Zealand after starting out in Wellington, which was kind of immigrants for beginners. Wellington is quite multicultural and it's the capital, so it wasn't too hard to settle there. But then we moved to a really rural area and was a full New Zealand experience with a small lifestyle block, and it didn't, it didn't work too well. Now, in this small town where we settled, they had the arrival in the library, which was quite extraordinary. It was a tiny library, and quite frankly, the books spent more time at our house than it did spend in the library shelves. So it was just so wonderful to see. It is a wordless book, The Arrival. It set the stage for the lack of words that go beyond language issues. Understanding is not necessarily a matter of words, but of cultural, educational, social backgrounds. It doesn't necessarily mean you speak the language well enough. Or, if you want to put it like that, if you speak to someone who has an accent, in 8 of 10 times that means that person speaks at least 2 languages fluent. Keep that in mind. His work helps to embrace dislocation, strangeness, and complexity without trying to explain it. And I think that's the key thought. Don't waste time trying to understand why you are lost in translation. which is after all pretty obvious. If you don't speak a language, you can't understand a thing. But welcome, enjoy, and use the experience to widen your horizon, your way of thinking and your way of seeing. Or, as Dr. Hunter S. Thompson has put it, buy the ticket, take the ride. Thank you.